Hey everyone, my name is Esonus, and today I'm going to be walking you through track 1 off my latest EP, Last Drop, called Tenshi Elevator. You can listen to this track using the link in the description, and if you like my music, feel free to follow me on my socials, which are also in the description. But with that out of the way, let's dig into this project. So these are all the different versions of the song here, and as you can see, this track was actually started in December of 2023, so about a year and a half ago now. And I want to play some of these versions for you all so we can explore the evolution of this track together from initial idea, which is this file right here, to the final release. So this is the first version of the track. It's pretty muddy and very basic, and it's just the drop. And it has all the elements there. The hi-hat pattern is there, the drums are there. It has the main drop sounds, but obviously it feels very empty because this is, it's just the drop and it's the first idea. It even has the B drop in here already. And I'll explain how all of these sounds were put together a little bit later, but that's what the first one sounds like. The next version is the first version with the vocal in it, and I'll also explain how I made the vocal a little bit later in this video, and this is what that sounds like. Tenshi Elevator. Obviously these aren't the final mix, that's why they sound really bad. But the next version that is notable is this one, version 3, because it's the first one that has these like pluck sounds. And the story behind that sound is actually pretty interesting. It actually came from a preset off of Ableton Note. Then the next notable version of this track is version 6, because this is the first version with a proper intro, or at least an attempt at an intro. Very, very basic. The pad sounds and stuff aren't there yet. The next notable version is version 9, because this is the first version that I added the breakdown section in, or like the little whoops after the drop. And then version 11 is the first version with a second drop. Tenshi Elevator. And originally the pre-drop was very, very different. Then version 12 is the one that's actually the same structure as the final mix. I finally decided on the length of the intro in this version. And this is what the outro sounds like. It's missing the vocal sound that's in the final version, which is this vocal sound. And that was added actually pretty late. I was originally going to release this mix of the track, which is actually way more distorted than the final mix ended up being. I thought it was a little bit too distorted, so I went back and redid the mix. And this is what that sounds like. So it's very crunchy, and ultimately I didn't end up going with that mix, but something I added during this phase was this like vocal sound at the end, which is just resampled from the drop vocal, which is this one. Tenshi Elevator. I actually made this new vocal sound from that pre-drop vocal. And the pattern used to be a lot more frequent. There were a lot more notes in the pattern, and then ultimately I simplified it a little bit to this. From this. And then ultimately it sounds like this in the final release. Okay, so we're back in the Ableton 12 project, and let's just go through the project group by group, I guess. The first group in this project is just the drum group, which is just kick and clap. This is a rhythm track after all. You don't need much more than that. The kick sounds like this. It's basically just a kick sample that I put some EQ on, and then this thing I call the drum punch rack. It's basically just a compressor with a very quick attack that just grabs the very initial transient of the drum sample. If I turn the wet all the way up, you can hear what it's doing a little bit better. You can see it's just grabbing that super initial click of the kick. And if you mix it in at 50% and turn up the output, you get a super punchy drum transient as a result. So I love using this rack. I think this might have originally come from an Ableton 9 preset that I eventually modified and turned into the drum punch rack. There's also a bit of noise layered on this kick. It's just an operator with white noise and some EQ. Together they make that kick sound. And with the clap added in, it sounds like this. And just the processing on the clap is basically just the same. Just some EQ, the slightest, tiniest bit of ping pong delay, just to add some width to the sound. This is like basically inaudible in the final mix. And then just some EQ, taking out some of the harsh frequencies, and a filter for the intro and the build. You might have also noticed this sidechain track right here in the kick group. Basically, this is how I sidechained. Not all the time. I usually use a sample instead of an operator for sidechaining, but in this track, I decided to just use a super short white noise click for the sidechain. This is what it sounds like. And all that does is it feeds a super short click into the Ableton 8 compressor, just doing some basic sidechain compression. And that's how I sidechain. Moving on to the cymbals group, the group itself just has a utility just to fade it out at the end, fade out these shaker sounds. And a little bit of sidechain with the Live 8 compressor, just turned to 35%. And going through all the tracks individually, there's this big AU5 crash sample at the start of the drops. You can hear that little bit of sidechain coming in. There's this closed hat sample, which nothing too crazy going on here, just a tiny little bit of delay as well, like on the clap. It adds almost ghost notes to the hi-hat, which is cool, but it's like almost inaudible in the mix. There's also this syncopated hi-hat in the track, but unfortunately the sample is gone, so I can't show you what it sounds like, but you can hear it in the original track. Next up is just a ride cymbal filling out the high end, and a super subtle shaker, just to continue the motif of the intro, which sounds like this. And altogether, the cymbals group and the drum group sound like this. Okay, the vocal. This actually came from Vital, as you can see, and I'll pull up the original patch so you can see how that was made too. So this is the original Vital preset that this vocal comes from.
Tenshi Elevator.
And right now it's frozen. Unfortunately, when I unfreeze it, it just completely clears the Vital preset, so it just sounds like a saw wave, which is unfortunate. But the way I made this is essentially just grabbing an initial Vital preset and then going text to wavetable and then typing in Tenshi Elevator. And that sounds like this. So all you would do next is just put an LFO on it with a ramp shape, set to a bar, maybe pitch it down a little bit.
Tenshi Elevator.
And it sounds like that.
Tenshi Elevator.
And then obviously you can see how this
Tenshi Elevator.
turned into this.
Tenshi Elevator.
With like some post-processing and auto-tune and all that other stuff. Also, the patch was a little bit different. I think there was like effects and stuff on here, but obviously since the patch is gone now, I don't know exactly how I made it, but that's essentially how you make sounds like that. You just go into Vital and then use the built-in text to wavetable. I know Serum 2 can do this now, I think, but I haven't really messed around with Serum 2 all that much. And when this track was being made, Serum 2 hadn't come out yet, so that's how I made the vocal for Tenshi Elevator. Moving on to the instruments group, there aren't that many non-drop instruments in this track, but obviously the main sound in the song, apart from the drops, is this like pluck synth. And I already explained how this preset comes from Ableton Note, and this ended up being like the main melodic sound in the track. It's basically in every section that isn't the drop. I feel like it really sets the tone and the atmosphere of the song. Obviously it's frozen right now, so there isn't much processing on it. This is the final project after all, but essentially what I did to this was just EQ, compression, a little bit of reverb, and then also adding in these fun reverse reverb swells during these quieter sections. They're super subtle, but they add a cool texture to the intro. The next sound in this group is this synth right here. It's missing a ton of the high frequencies above 5K on purpose because I cut them out. I think I made this synth with Massive. We can actually go in here and just grab it out. No, this is Serum actually. Yeah, the Serum patch is very basic. Just a saw wave with some diode distortion, some hyper, some OTT on it. And then I cut off all of the high end, or else it would sound like this. Gives it a really cool texture when you do stuff like that, using EQ in extreme ways. The next sound is this PSR6 handbell sample. This is actually from an old synth from the 80s, the Yamaha PSR6. It was kind of like a toy synthesizer at the time, mainly geared towards like kids, but it is a full like FM synthesizer that you just, go through the presets of. And I found it in the trash a really long time ago, and I went through and sampled all of the presets that I thought were really cool. And now I have this folder full of PSR6 samples, which is this one right here, full of PSR6 samples. And I use these a lot in my music because you don't really hear this synth being used in music in general anymore or ever, because it was a kid's toy synth. And it sounds really cool when you combine it with modern electronic sounds. The next sound in this track is this choir sound. It's just an expand choir preset that I just put some reverb, some delay, and some EQ on. The coolest thing about this synth in the track is when it goes down in pitch, I think, and the filter closes, it sounds really sick. Especially because it combines really well with the pluck sounds. And then last but not least, the wubs. This I made in Massive, and I'll pull up that preset right now. So this is the patch. I think it was based off of this Massive Likely preset. I don't exactly know what I changed, but if I switch to it, you'll probably hear that it sounds very, very different. So this is what the preset originally sounds like. And this is what I ended up turning it into. So I did change the preset quite a bit, and I did some very basic processing. Again, just EQ, saturation, delay, mainly just to offset it and make it kind of offbeat like this. And then just some limiting and a little bit more EQ at the end. So now onto the drop. The main drop synth is also a Massive preset called Wind Her Up, but I ended up making it sound like this. And I think originally it was a very different sound, so let me just find the preset for that and compare the two. Yeah, originally it was a very, very different sound. So anyway, I put on some bootleg disperser, which is basically made of a bunch of EQ3s in series, putting things out of phase with these different bands. A little bit of OTT, some filtering, a little bit of imaging, and boosting the stereo a bunch. I got a parallel reverb chain right here, some more EQ and stuff. Nothing too crazy. The second drop synth is basically the same preset as this main drop synth, but just tweaked a little bit. And to create those cool like swells in the synth, I actually used a shifter device, and I'm shifting the pitch down just a tiny little bit, only 4 hertz, and I'm automating the mix of that in these little fill sections. Because when you introduce a sound that's just a little bit off pitch, you start getting phase cancellation, and that's what makes those really cool wobbles that you hear during the fills. And you can make this super extreme, super fluttery, or kind of like softer by just increasing or decreasing the pitch shift. The next 2 sounds in the drop are these really cool synths, also from Massive. I have to go into an even older version of the project to get these before they were flattened to audio. And this patch is basically unchanged from the preset that I used. If I go and just reset the preset, it'll sound basically exactly the same. And the original preset actually sounds like this. So it's not even like a melodic synth, it's like an alarm sound, but I ended up turning it into this kind of more melodic synth by finding the right key of it and just putting some basic effects on it. Also playing it at a really high octave, 2 octaves higher than the preset usually is played at. The next sound in the drop is this wobble synth. And essentially how I made this was the same method I've been making all the other drop sounds in this track, just using a Massive preset called Drillers and putting some post-processing on it. I put a bunch of saturation on this one just to make it sound extra crunchy. There's a big difference with the saturator on and off. So the saturator is doing the bulk of the work on this one. And then these 2 sounds are also being processed together in this little group right here. There's this crazy looking EQ with the Ozone 11 equalizer. that's doing a lot of the tonal shaping for both of these sounds. If I turn it off, it sounds really different. And there's also a bunch of distortion on these sounds together, which is why the waveform is so like flat, because they're being crunched to hell. If I turn this clipper off, it sounds really different actually. Yeah, this clipper's adding all that extra grit and high end to the sound. Then moving on to the subgroup. The subgroup is really simple. It's just a sub bass with, I think, the first harmonic and the third harmonic, just made an operator with a little bit of a pitch bend. And then this yoi layer on top with a bunch of EQ just to make it fit in the mix a little bit better. The yoi was actually made in operator as well. Honestly, I thought I made it in Serum or something, but I guess it is made in operator. It's a sine wave with a coarse pitch of 4, being automated by another sine wave with a lower pitch, and also a triangle wave with a super crazy high pitch. That's what gives it that vowel movement. And then just putting some yo man and some EQ on the sound to make it fit in the mix a little bit better. And then the effects of this track are very simple. I am missing this riser sample. I had an incident where a bunch of my sample packs got deleted because I was an idiot. But most of the files in this track are still here, thankfully. This is what the effects group sounds like. So it's basically just a root note synth. This is just a saw wave in Serum at a high pitch with a bunch of unison and detune. Just doing the root note of the song. Virtual Riot used to do this a lot. Skrillex used to do this a lot in some of the older tracks, and I still do it because I think it sounds cool. The next sound is this hyper layer. It's from a Virtual Riot splice pack, and I use it in like every song because it just sounds so sick. And that's just playing every quarter note, giving the drums and the basses a little bit more power to them. Then there's this offbeat yeah sample. This super basic noise riser that I also turned into a downlifter by just looping the end in a sampler. And then finally, the intro pad / ambience. This sound is actually from one of my older tracks called Who Am I Now? And it's just the very, very start of the song, just stretched out a bunch. I wish I had the original sample to show you guys. And essentially, this is just the intro of the song, stretched out a bunch and put into a new key with some just EQ and compression on it. And it sounds like this. It's a very watery sound, but it does have that like sine wave root note in it. And then all the drop synths and the sub basses are going into this heavy aux group, which just has an EQ with some dynamic EQ on the high end. Just making sure the high end doesn't get too crazy and harsh. And then all the other sounds in the track are going through this sidechain bus, which I already explained a little bit before. For mastering, I don't really do anything. I just kind of put an M saturator on the track and then just call it a day with a little bit of threshold for the saturation just on the clip 1 mode with the clipping turned off. So it's a little bit cleaner on the extreme settings with the limiter on, so I get the tiniest little bit of headroom so I can convert it to other file formats and stuff without getting any unnecessary clipping. And then the track sounds like this.
Tenshi Elevator.
I hope you guys learned something new, or at least had fun and enjoyed the video. I will be making breakdown videos of the 2 other tracks on the EP as well, Chick Flicks and Everybody Part 2, so stay tuned for those. But that's been it for today, guys. Thank you for watching.